Blue carbon, what is it and why does it matter? Quickly, in 10 minutes. Blue carbon, we've been working on it for around about a year and a half, something like that. But actually, it's a term that's been around for around 10 years. It's not new. It's something that scientists have been working on for quite a long time. And in essence, blue carbon is simply the marine equivalent of trees, peat bogs, those sorts of things on land. What blue carbon is the capture and storage of carbon from the air. So just as it is with trees and peat bogs and those sorts of things. And there's quite a lot of different places within the marine environment that are kind of blue carbon habitats, as we call them. Two of the main ones are seagrass and salt marsh. So seagrass, you'll probably quite a lot of you know, you find around the edge of the coast. It looks like sort of grassy stuff, but it's in the water. It's at relatively low depths because it photosynthesizes and it's green. And it's right around the UK coast. Seagrass is incredibly good at capturing what we call sequestering carbon. It brings 0.2% of the world's oceans. It's what seagrass covers. It's not a huge area, but it captures 10% of the carbon that's buried in the ocean. And seagrass basically photosynthesizes, pulls carbon in through that route, but it stores it then in the seabed, and it's really good at doing that. But seagrass is under threat. We've lost quite a lot since the 1980s and actually before that. Salt marsh, similarly, all around our coasts, big areas, was a lot larger area than it is now. But again, that's pulling in carbon and storing it in the sediment all the way around our coasts. A really important habitat as well as being important from a carbon capture point of view. And as I said there, salt marsh and seagrass beds together account for around the UK coast, they account for between 1,000 and 2,000 kilometres square of tropical forest. That's the equivalent. That's what we're looking at. We're saying, you know, these habitats are equivalent to land. But if you think of a tropical forest, think also about seagrass, salt marsh, those sorts of things. Kelp isn't quite as good at capturing carbon because it doesn't hold it in the sediment in the way that seagrass and salt marsh does, but it still does capture carbon. You know, there's the big sort of kelp plants that got that kind of hold fast. There's a lot of carbon that's captured within all that growth. The seabed, really important in terms of trying to capture carbon. So seabed itself doesn't pull it in, but the carbon just sits there within the seabed. The UK, around the UK, seabed sediments, so down to 200 meters in depth, what we call the shelf sediments, they store 205 million tons of carbon. That's 50 more million tons than is stored in our UK forests. It's huge. They store carbon within the seabed. So if you disturb that seabed, you're throwing up that carbon, you're releasing it, and you're releasing it into the water, not necessarily into the air, but making sure you don't disturb the seabed by things like bottom trawling is really, really important. Shellfish beds, shellfish also, they capture carbon, they hold it, they can release the carbon a bit as they grow, so they're not quite as effective, but shellfish have the extra added bonus that they purify water as well. So things like oysters, mussels, all those things, they filter feed, they take in what could be polluted water and they purify it as they go along. So they've got a plus double bonus. And one that might be a surprise is marine mammals and fish. So the stuff that's swimming around in our seas itself can capture carbon. This is nice if you're having your tea, so you might not want to listen for a minute, but whales swimming around in our seas, they eat tiny little phytoplankton, tiny microorganisms. Of course, whales also poo. As they poo, the microorganisms feed off that. It's a source of nutrients for them, and they increase. And whales, of course, eat more, it's more growth. Eventually, when a whale dies, it dies in those very, very deep waters. And it's captured then in that seabed and in that sediment, and all that carbon that it's eaten and stored and brought in is stored with it. So all of these habitats are really important from a carbon point of view. I've kind of said why it matters, but to put it very bluntly, in monetary terms, our blue carbon habitats around the UK are worth somewhere around 740, 750 million to 2.3 billion per year, because you've got a price for carbon, and so you can work it out. And the amount that's stored, that 10.5 to 60 megatons of CO2 equivalent, as we call it, that's a range. The terrestrial habitats, by comparison, capture around 28 megatons of carbon. So what that means is that those blue carbon habitats in our sea, what they can store, what they can capture, is equivalent to what can be captured in our terrestrial habitats. We're not thinking about this at the moment, and we need to be. Blue carbon in our marine environment could really count towards the targets that we have to meet in order to reach that 1.5, go no further than that 1.5 degree increase in temperature. Blue carbon could count for something like 6% of the difference. And we're at the stage where there is a climate change emergency. And so we have to throw everything at this. Please, blue carbon habitats are really important. And it's a virtuous circle. So if we look after our marine environment, if we restore our marine environment, then it will be healthier. We will have more blue carbon. We will have, as well as mitigating climate change and doing that blue carbon stuff that I've talked about, these habitats are also pretty important in terms of adapting to climate change. So things like salt marsh and seagrass, they create a buffer around our coasts. And where you have storms, you have rising sea levels, they can create a buffer to that. So they're important from the adaptation point of view as well as the mitigation point of view. And long term, this becomes positive as it carries on. You have less ocean acidification, you recover fish stocks, so it's good for the fishing industry and our economy. And as I said, there's also that thing around adapting and dealing with climate change itself. As the biodiversity increases and the blue carbon habitats improve, you're also going to get natural regeneration, and those habitats themselves will become more resilient. The perilous state that we're in at the moment could really be helped a lot by restoring, rewilding our marine environment, as I know Peter's been talking about earlier. It's absolutely vital, and there's lots of pluses, there's lots of wins within this. So what we've asked for as MCS is, as you've heard, to scale up the rewilding of our marine environment, to think about the role of the ocean in mitigating and adapting to climate change. So that's an ask of the government to really build this in and build it in from now on, post COP26, really do this. And also to increase funding for nature. Yes, nature-based solutions, yes, some of that needs to come from government, but quite a lot needs to come from private sources. So those three things together are absolutely vital. Please do have a look at our report that you've got the information to there around blue carbon and fighting the climate crisis. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thanks for joining me.